What do you know about the celebration of the Day of the Dead, El Día de los Muertos?
How do you feel about your own death and dying?
How can we celebrate the Day of Dead with joy?
I'm Tessa Balecki.
And I'm Dave Denny.
And this is Fire and Light.
Conversations on life, love, and soul.
Welcome, everyone, to the month of November and our conversation today about the Day of the Dead and the Marigold Path. I love the month of November because it's all about orange, my
That's
favorite
right.
color.
You have an entire apartment decked with orange and marigolds.
It's my favorite color. So you see orange towels hanging on my bathroom door and an orange Afghan on my bed, and I have orange frying pans and an orange coffee cup. And this time of year, yes, I fill my patio with orange marigolds. I bring as many as I can inside the house. There are orange pumpkins. I'm wearing my Day of the Dead t-shirt to get in the mood.
And you learned something new about the origin of marigolds.
You know, I've always loved this flower. I've grown marigolds for as long as I can remember, wherever I lived. The Nahuatl word, the word in the Aztec language for the marigold, is cempasúchil, which means 20 flowers, or what it really means is there are many, many petals in this very, very beautiful.
It's a very tight.
Yeah, very tight blossom. And the Day of the Dead is a very ancient celebration for the Aztec people. Orange was the color of the land of the dead. And we're going to come back to that when we talk about that wonderful movie, Coco, which is a must-see for every adult as well as every child. So orange became the color of death. The marigold is also called the flower of death.
That's interesting because last month, of course, we had the orange pumpkin for Halloween. And you were talking about the meaning of Samhain, I think it was, Samhain in Ireland, which was a little spooky. Could be.
Yeah, it's interesting that so you have a celebration of death and the coming of the departed souls back to this plane of existence
at Halloween,
at this time of year for the Celts. But yes, there was a lot of fear for them, which is why, remember, they built bonfires, which were originally fires of bones, which is where we get bonfire, and so they were frightened. But in Mexico, in this part of the world, the celebration is very, very joyful. It's full of color. It's full of warmth. The orange marigolds and other flowers. There's music. There's special foods. If you live in a part of the world where they don't celebrate this day, you need to come to Tucson or Los Angeles. I think they do it in New York City. Anywhere there is a large Mexican population.
Sometimes weren't Christians a little bit leery about it because it was pre-Christian?
Well,
so
yeah.
they didn't want to mess with that stuff. But it is connected for Christians with All Saints' Day, right?
All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. So in our Christian tradition, November 2nd has traditionally been celebrated as All Souls' Day when we pray for our dead. So now what's happened is that these celebrations are conflated. They come together in, I think, a very, very rich way. And part of what I love is, I know there's so much talk these days about cultural misappropriation, but what I love about where we live, those who own a certain tradition invite the rest of us. So remember in June when we went and we harvested saguaro fruit, the indigenous people, the Tohono O'odham, participated in that and invited us to do it. And the same thing happens here where we live. that everyone is invited to participate in this celebration. You might think that this is a dreary thing to be talking about death. It isn't, and that's part of what we want to share with you in our conversation. You can't really live your life unless you face the fact that one day you're going to die. I went to a Day of the Dead celebration last Saturday night. At the beginning of the performance, they flashed this incredible quote up on the screen, and it was, "Death is democratic." I absolutely love that. Death is democratic. At the end of the day, everyone ends up a skeleton. I think this is so wise because death is the great leveler. We are all going to die. And I think the greatest gift of the Mexican peoples is their celebration of Day of the Dead. So,
and there's so many contrasts. Like, when you think of bones and death, people mostly think of mourning. And yet, for those of you who aren't familiar with the culture of the Southwest, you'll be surprised that these skeletons are dressed up and they're fancy and they're smiling and dancing.
they're dancing, they're playing guitars, they marry one another, they eat, they drink.
Even in your house, you have funny little symbols on your refrigerator that combine two unusual symbols.
Oh, yeah. Someone gave me a little fridge magnet of a skeleton, and then I found a martini glass magnet, and I put the martini glass as though the skeleton were floating on top of the glass. And it reminded me of this quote. What I was doing on the fridge without realizing it was really a profound meditation that what we need to do is drink life like water and death like wine. I don't want to explain that. I don't want to unpack that. I just want to
celebrate it.
Celebrate it. Put that out for people. What might that mean to you? Because what the Day of the Dead is really celebrating is life. I also have on my Day of the Dead altar a ceramic tile that I bought that I really see as a figure of myself. It's a skeleton woman. And she's dressed in my colors, which are the fire colors, red, orange, yellow. So she has a petticoat of red, orange, and yellow hat on. And I love there's a little bit of blue on the underneath of her petticoat. And she's wearing red shoes. She has a bottle of wine in one hand and a glass of wine in the other. And she's celebrating her life. That's what this day is all about. It's really about remembering to live. And we can't really live unless we face our death. And the life and death are not opposed to one another. They go together. And we see that, first of all, in nature, in the seasons. We look out at our land and we see how the land dies, leaves die, our crop of corn from the summer dies and leaves dead stalks. Our flowers and vegetables stop fruiting, we stop harvesting, the plants die, and everything goes back into the earth to generate more life. And that's what people do. People die. People go back into the earth either as bones or as ashes to feed the earth, both literally and then symbolically. This is a sign of our resurrection, of our new life. And I think we see this so beautifully in Coco. How did you respond to that movie?
Well, it's hard to put it into words, but it was a wonderful celebration of everything you've been talking about. It's set in Mexico, a little boy who thinks that his ancestor was a great musician and wants to emulate him. And he sets off on a quest. And it's amazing what it reveals about his family life, what it reveals about the power of music, what it reveals about the sense of free and easy communication that this young boy's family feels with their ancestors. And it describes the feast of the Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, in a really beautiful, highly charged, graphic way.
And very emotional.
Oh my gosh.
You really have to have your Kleenex ready.
Yeah. But also a lot of laughs.
And a lot of laughs.
There's an hilarious dog, for example.
I think what's amazing about it is, I love what you just said, the communication, the communion between the living and the dead. You know, in our Roman Catholic tradition, we have this beautiful expression, the communion of saints, which doesn't just mean the great famous holy people who are canonized. We're all saints. And so there's this communion going on all the time. I don't know how to describe it, whether we mean this side and the other side, whether we mean one plane of existence and another, or heaven and earth. But it's a continuum. It's a whole. I love how, I don't remember if it was St. Paul or, some a Native American elder who said, there is no death, there is only a change of worlds. And that's what you see in Coco. And it's all about the importance of remembering.
Yes, one of the main songs in the soundtrack, which is wonderful, is called Remember Me.
Yeah, the importance of remembering our ancestors, remembering our loved ones. We have a friend who says, by remembering her deceased loved ones, she basically keeps them alive. And she has an altar that is set up all year long. It's not only for Day of the Dead. So part of what happens is you set up an altar with photographs of your deceased loved ones, those who have made the passage across, well, Dave, what you and I are now calling the Marigold Bridge.
Yes, which is portrayed beautifully in the movie.
Yeah, that's where I got most emotional, was when he crosses over the Marigold Bridge. It's an unbelievable moment. It's the heart of the whole movie for me, and it's kind of I'm fascinated by. So I've always had this love of those orange marigolds. It was almost like a premonition that I had some sense of what this really means, because both for the Aztecs and then for all of their descendants in our own time, the sprinkling of petals, or the setting up big bouquets of marigolds, is to make it easier for our loved ones to come back on this night to be with us. So whether you're sprinkling petals from the graveyard to the door of your house, or you're putting them all around your altar, or all around your doorway, the smell and the color of the flowers attracts the spirits of our ancestors. And I don't know, I guess I'm somehow deep down in my subconscious, I had some sense of this early on, which is partly why I love this flower. So the beauty of the Marigold Bridge, the Marigold Path, is quite outstanding in the film. And also the scene in the cemetery. So what happens is you have your altar in your home, you're celebrating your ancestors with their photos, with things that they loved, with their favorite foods. A lot of food on the altar. They're always interesting. And I was actually in Oaxaca, Mexico for one Day of the Dead many years ago. All over town, there were altars set up, and it's quite fascinating what gets placed on. Anything goes. Anything can go on the altar. Whether you put up bread or fruit or tequila, or if a child has died, you put their favorite toys on the altar. It's very, very personalized, very, very meaningful. And then the evening of the Day of the Dead, you go to the cemetery and you take all this food and all these marigolds and you create an altar at the gravesite. And you celebrate at the gravesite again with music, with dancing, and you're remembering lovingly all of these ancestors by telling stories about them, which again is keeping them alive and passing on their memory to future generations.
Yeah, it seems like so often we just have a memorial service or a funeral, and that's it.
That's it. Yeah. But this wonderful people, these Mexican people, descendants of the Aztecs, do something so much more. And they celebrate every year. They celebrate their ancestors every year. So I love the cemetery scene in Coco. It's also one of the most moving scenes. I'd like to make a recommendation. If you have children and you want to introduce your kids not only to this day, but to the whole idea of our dying, our passing on to another world across the Marigold Bridge, first of all, watching Coco is an excellent way to do it because the movie does bring you face to face with death.
And it revolves around children.
And it revolves around children. I do not believe this is a children's movie. I know adults who won't see it because they say this is a cartoon for kids. It is not. It is a brilliant animated way. It's a work of art. Every scene is a work of art, but especially the scenes with the marigolds. So I also would recommend 2 books, tiny little books. I've bought and given many, many away to children that I know. Both of them are called The Day of the Dead. One is by Tony Johnston. This one is a little more poetic and emphasizes the illustrations more. The teaching is more through really exquisite illustrations that almost look like scenes from Coco. This book came first before Coco. The opening page of this book begins with "The sun rose like a giant marigold." The marigold not only represents the color of the land of the dead and is the flower of the dead, but it's like a sun. It's like the beginning of new life, the beginning of a day. So that's one of my favorite pages in that book. The cemetery scene is also another favorite illustration for me. The other book is more verbal. It's not so much giving you an imaginative feel for the Day of the Dead, but it tells you more of the history of it. And it's by Linda Lowery. So I recommend both of those, again, for adults as well as for children. I bring them out every year, and I read them over and over again at this time of the year. And it's all about remembering, even the way the Tony Johnston book. So, Dave, you talked about the connection, the communion between the living and the dead, and the way they present the grandmother and grandfather, abuelos, abuelitos who have died, is very beautiful. You get a sense of presence, that they are present in our lives, looking out for us.
So you've been talking a lot about the openness to death and dying, the communion between the living and the dead that's celebrated on this feast day. You've also written elsewhere about people's regrets that they have as they're dying. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, this is a very important topic. If you look at our book Desert Voices. I wrote about it in that book. I've also posted it again on my website, tessabalecki.com, because this is a very important question.
This was written by a hospice nurse, right?
Yeah. So some years ago, a hospice nurse in Australia just kept hearing over and over again as she worked with dying patients how often they expressed the same regrets. And she wrote a blog about it, which was so enormously successful that she then did a book. Her name is Bronnie, not Bonnie. There's an R in there. Bronnie Ware, Ware. And the book is called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And I think it's very interesting to look at what those are. If we look at this now, we can live our lives differently so that when we come to the time of our death, we won't have those regrets. The most common regret is people wishing that they had been true to themselves instead of living according to the expectations that other people have or had of them. We don't live authentic lives because we're trying to people please. We're victims of human approval. So we betray our own souls, basically.
And part of that, too, especially at least it used to, I don't know how it's balanced out today, but that men had a particular regret about work in their lives.
Yes, it was mostly men who regretted that they worked too hard. I think today there are many, many women who would say that. I still suffer from that, I must be honest. I think I work too hard. And so people miss out on the presence of their loved ones. They miss out on their children growing up. They miss out on just the celebration of the good things in life because they're working hard to make money for a future, which then will be very shortened if they just keep on driving themselves for some future time instead of living in the now.
And it's not just immediate family that they are thinking about, is it?
Oh, no.
As they're dying?
Oh, yes, because they also miss... I wish I'd stayed in touch with my friends. So I don't have time for my friends because I'm too busy working. So that's another one. And then the fifth one is quite interesting. It's, I wish I had let myself be happier. And this is quite fascinating because we tend to think that it's circumstances outside of us that determines whether or not we're going to be happy. And what this Bronnie Ware writes about is how happiness is our own free human choice. And instead of choosing to be happy, we get caught up in our old patterns of thought, old patterns of old ways of doing things. And we don't fulfill our dreams. We don't fulfill our dreams.
Yeah, I wonder if part of that is just, we've talked about a Puritan culture that we live in, a work ethic. There's not enough of anything. There's scarcity. You have to work. Dog eat dog. Competition.
Yeah.
There's nobody gets enough. And so you have to keep slogging away.
Instead of that sense of abundance, that there is always enough, life is more than money, life is more than material possessions. I don't know, I almost think of myself as the death lady, not only because I've had so much experience of death in my life. I guess it's because I've had so much experience of death in my life that I'm fascinated by how we do it well. And I was part of a group that there's a movement it's actually worldwide. It's called death cafes. And so groups will sponsor a death cafe, a small group of people. You'd be separated into different small groups at individual tables, not only to discuss your feelings about death and about dying, but you're doing it in order to live better. So that the cafes that I helped organize, like two of the most important questions for discussion were, who are the happiest people I know and why? And when do I feel most alive? When do I feel most alive? Who do I know that's happiest so that I can make some changes in my life and become more alive, become happier? So again, it's all mixed up. Living and dying, all mixed up. You and I have known several people who died well.
Yes, when we think about those 5 regrets you just talked about, we've been very fortunate because several people that we've known and loved had very few regrets, actually, and were fairly peaceful when they died.
Yeah. So we have sat, you and I, at the deathbed. I think 4 or 5 people we have sat with as they were dying, several of them for as long as 10 days, for hours on end. And we just want to tell you a little bit about why each one was outstanding. And they died well because they lived well. I can't emphasize that enough. So, how about your dad?
Well, my dad was a famously gregarious person, loved being around other people, always ready to hear your story because he was fascinated by you, even if he didn't know you. By the end of the conversation, you would feel you had really gotten to know him and the opposite as well. So that's the kind of man he was, always looking out for others and always bringing joy into life. As he was dying, one of the hospice nurses told me, and she was very tactful because you never know ahead of time if a person really wants to have people around him or her, or whether the person wants to die alone. And you will hear many stories of people who I know a woman whose mother was dying, and the woman just left for a few minutes, and she came back and her mom had died. And sometimes people want to be alone. Anyway, my dad was hanging on to life in hospice in his assisted living place. And the nurse said, I think maybe you should just say your goodbyes and allow him to take his time on his own to die.
Because he was hanging on for your sake.
That's what she felt.
He was concerned about you.
Yeah, which is kind of beautiful and touching. So we had some prayers we said together at the end there, and he was trying to say something. And I put my ear up to his lips, and he whispered, "Dave, I know you wish you could do more, but I'm a happy camper."
Yeah.
That's the last thing I ever heard him say.
Yeah.
And then I went and we celebrated Christmas, and the next day they called and said Dad had died.
Yeah.
But he died a happy camper.
And he couldn't die unless you left.
I think that's what it felt like.
Our friend Jessica Danson died a very holy, very beautiful death. She could hardly wait. She was excited about dying. She was a woman of great faith. And even as she was dying, one of her prayers over and over again was, "Take me, take me." She was so ready. She was so eager. And both she and my dad had finished their business. They had forgiven people. They had apologized to people.
Didn't she even just start calling friends to say goodbye?
She called everybody that she knew to say goodbye, to say goodbye and to say thank you, to say, I love you. Thank you. I've loved knowing you, and goodbye. And we're sitting there as she's calling person after person, or as this procession of people kept coming in to say goodbye to her. And of course, people were sad, and she would be comforting them. I kept a diary of sitting at her deathbed those 10 days. And also, this is in our book, Desert Voices. It's called Holy Dying. I hope I'm going to get this up on my website, tessabalecki.com, too, because not all of you have the book, but you can look at the website. Because the reason I kept the diary was she died unafraid. The witness of how she died, I think, can help other people face their own deaths much more peacefully. We can be inspired. Another person who really inspired me in his attitude towards his final days and his dying was Dr. Oliver Sacks. He was an author. In 2015, he found out that he had terminal cancer. He wrote a meditation on this in the New York Times. He said, okay, here I am. I am face to face with dying. And then again, just like we have the choice to be happy, he said, and now it's up to me to choose how I'm going to live these last months. And this is what he said, I have to live in the richest, deepest, most productive way I can. And what he chose to do was, in those last months, deepen his friendships, like Jessica, say goodbye to those I love, to write more, and then I love this, to achieve new levels of understanding and insight. To achieve new levels of understanding and insight. Not to gripe about the fact that he was suffering from cancer and about to die. He was 81. But it wasn't too late for him to come to a deeper understanding of what life is all about. And he said there's no time for anything inessential. So he stopped listening to the news. He stayed away from any kind of arguments, which he felt were useless. And what I find fascinating about this, you look at his witness, he's not just talking about how he's going to spend his last months and how he's going to do his dying, but this is about how to live your life. We should be focusing, not wasting time on inessentials while we're alive. We should be coming to new insights and understandings while we're alive. We should be doing all the things he says that he wants to do in the last months. We should be doing all along because we never know.
I think it's sometimes important to point out that there are different stages along the way. And for example, if you've just found out you've got some kind of a terminal disease or something, you're going to go through some pretty heavy stuff. But we're just trying to emphasize today that in the end, as you go through those different stages, you move toward a kind of a freedom, a kind of surrender that's quite liberating.
Yeah, that's a very, very important point you made, because initially there can be shock, anger, panic,
denial,
fear, all of these, worry about the ones you're leaving behind, how they'll cope, what they'll do. So we don't want to minimize that. Here's kind of a summary, really, of what we're talking about. We were taught this by our root teacher, Father William. This is one of his most important lessons I learned from him. And this is what he said: choose death now. And what he means by that is be ready for the fact that you're going to die. Understand that death is democratic and that you're going to become a skeleton just like everybody else. But also all the little deaths, all the little letting goes, like the death of someone else in your family, the loss of a job, the loss of a home, the loss of your cherished ideals, disillusionments. All of that is choosing death now. So he said, choose death now and draw from that encounter radical consequences for life fully lived. Because that's the goal, is life fully lived. And we can't fully live it unless we're facing our deaths.
Yeah, it's quite a paradox. It's not morbid, it's actually vital.
Yeah, it's vital. So that's why I feel like I'm the death lady, because I'm the life lady. You know, it's all about living life to the hilt. And death is an inevitable part of life, as anybody who grows a garden knows.
So what's our practice then for this month?
Well, I think it's pretty clear. First of all, watch Coco. Very important to see that film. As a family, watch it together, weep together, think about the death of loved ones together, grieve together. Create an altar in your home in honor of your loved ones. The word for it in the tradition is an ofrenda, an offering, that you are honoring and remembering your loved ones by doing this.
And you can just make it up, or you could probably look up ofrenda on Google or something,
Yes,
and find some amazing examples of how it's been done throughout Mexico or the Southwest.
Yeah, there are traditional things that are fun to put up, like skulls made out of sugar, the marigolds, of course, these very beautiful paper decorations, these kind of paper banners, which figure so beautifully in Coco. It's how they do the credits at the beginning and the end. It's just gorgeous. But it's very, very personal. So you really need to make it your own. So those would be our practices for the month.
Okay.
And do go to our both our websites. My website, you'll find those top 5 regrets of the dying and some other stuff on Day of the Dead. And be sure to go to sandandsky.org because Dave has written a brand new exquisite poem. It's called Marigolds and Leaf Mold. So he's thinking about Day of the Dead, of course, and it's autumn and leaves are falling. And so he's meditating on the falling of the leaves, how the leaves fall, how our lives fall like leaves. And then we walk across the marigold path. So look at sandandsky.org for that poem. And our meditation for this conversation, again, is a summary of what we're talking about. It really summarizes what the practice is, and it's in the spirit of your beautiful poetry. So set us up, Dave.
Take a moment now to find a comfortable posture, one in which you can breathe deeply and take a few deep breaths. And place yourself in an atmosphere of remembering.
I remember my ancestors. I may not know them, but I share their gestures and even the echoes of their joys, their hopes, their fears, and their sorrows.
I remember people I have loved and lost, family members, friends, loves.
I imagine what they see in me and how they encourage me.
I build an altar, an ofrenda, to honor and remember them.
I place symbols, images, all kinds of things on the altar, photos, flowers, food, works of art.
Tools of their trade, a piece of clothing or jewelry.
How do I feel as I meditate on this sacred space? Anger? Sorrow? Contrition? Gratitude? Wonder?
I light a candle. I listen.
I feel myself going back in time. I feel my ancestors and friends guiding me forward.
They give me counsel. They allow me to take a new direction in my life.
To slow down and savor my life in gratitude.
To express my deepest longings.
So I ask myself, in their honor, in their memory, what brings me joy? How can I build more joy into my days?
My joy is resistance. I trust it serves the world.
I take a few breaths and thank my ancestors for bringing me to this unique life, my life.
Amen.
Amen.
You've been listening to Fire and Light, conversations on life, love, and soul.
If you like what you've heard, go to our websites, tessabalecki.com
and sandandsky.org.
and push that donate button. And remember your ancestors, remember the Day of the Dead. Thank you for listening.
I'm David Denny.
I'm Tessa Balecki.
And this is Fire and Light. Conversations on life, love, and soul.
The background music for Fire and Light is The Day We Met, composed and performed by Ricky Zhao.
Fire and Light's theme music is Dreamcatcher, composed and performed by Chris Martin and Jeff Harvey at Purple Planet Music.
Fire and Light is recorded in Tucson, Arizona, editing by David Levin.